The so-called humanitarian pier that was meant to help transport aid to civilians in Gaza has had to contend with rough seas and weather-related setbacks since it was first announced 4 months ago. Now the Pentagon says that after its most recent failure to reconnect the floating pier to the Gaza shoreline, it will cease operations of the pier entirely. The pier cost the US $230 million, and since mid-May, it delivered 20 million pounds of food to the Palestinians. Now that might sound like a lot, but it's really not. According to very rough UN estimates, about 500 aid trucks entered Gaza prior to October 2023. Over the course of 2 months, the US pier delivered roughly 1 day's worth of pre-October aid. The pier was always meant to be a temporary measure while the US tried to convince Israel to allow aid trucks through. But as you can imagine, those efforts have been largely unsuccessful. And the pier has been controversial from the get-go. Republicans argued that the pier put US troops in danger. That hasn't really been demonstrated, though. And President Biden has come off as disingenuous, to put it nicely, in terms of his humanitarianism. While the Biden administration was making attempts, weak attempts, but attempts nonetheless, to provide aid for the people who need it the most, it was also supplying Israel with more weaponry. The Biden administration recently announced that it will resume sending bombs to Israel after having previously paused shipments. But don't worry, they're only sending now the 500-pound bombs, not the 2,000-pound bombs, so it's better. In May, after Israel was using the US supplied bombs in Rafah, Biden stopped sending them to Israel, citing concerns for the safety of Palestinians. However, once Israel announced that it would end its campaign in Rafah, shipments of the 500-pound bombs were allowed to resume. The 2,000-pound bombs are apparently where the US draws its line. According to a US official who spoke anonymously, he said, "Our main concern had been and remains the potential use of 2,000-pound bombs in Rafah and elsewhere in Gaza. Because our concern was not about the 500-pound bombs, those are moving forward as part of the usual process." Now, there's more, but I want to get your thoughts, Jordan, I guess, on war in general, but also talk a little bit about the duplicity between providing bombs to the bombers and aid to the people who are being bombed at the same time. I feel like that doesn't really get talked about enough. And how are we as Americans supposed to feel about any of this?
Thanks for watching. Our audience has helped build TYT into the media giant it is today. Together, we can accomplish anything. Support our work and join us at tyt.com/team.
With all of this, the devil is in the details. So they're saying, oh, we're going to withhold the 2,000-pound bombs, but we'll give them the 500-pound bombs. Let's look at the consequences of both. A 500-pound bomb can severely harm or kill everything or anyone in a 20 meter radius. A 2,000-pound bomb has a destruction radius of 35 meters. So not the biggest difference, and they're acting like this is some huge sweeping change in how this war is waged. And it's even worse when they're dropping them on residential areas. Gaza City is now being repopulated, or not repopulated, let me be clear. The IDF is withdrawing from some parts of Gaza City, and people are returning to find that their neighborhoods have been completely destroyed. Their hospital is gone. Everything that they knew and loved and held dear in that area is gone. It is rubble because of these bombs that we're supplying to Israel. And on this pier thing, they tried to sell this as some success. Throughout its duration, it was only operational for maybe a little over 20 days. And they bragged about 8,500 tons of food making it through. And that is the equivalent of 425 aid trucks. That sounds like a lot, right? Well, Gaza needs about 600 trucks of aid every single day. So throughout that whole duration, all the millions spent, they weren't even able to meet the daily quota of aid necessary to help people in need. These same people, like you point out, are being bombed with arms supplied by the US. It is so unbelievably insidious, and the US is completely complicit.
It's such a tough situation because it's just sadness really everywhere you look on the Gaza situation. And with regard to the pier, it was never really working well, the pier. It had sustained damage. There'd been storms. It was not this sort of, great, we set up the pier, let's start unloading food. It just didn't work out quite that way from the get. And then the reality of what Gaza is now, what Gaza is going to be, and the political end game is really complicated and nuanced, and it's sad, frankly. That's the only word that comes to mind. I thought there were going to be close to some kind of resolution on this, meaning, I mean, it's wildly imperfect given everything that's happened, but that there'd be some cessation of immediate hostilities, maybe hostage release, I don't know, but now I'm not so sure. Those seem to be maybe a fading dream. I think the overall situation with Gaza military support, just to address the last point, is again, it's complicated. That's where you get into the politics of an administration that feels a connection to what they feel is the only democracy in the region, the same country that has, I was going to say, supports essentially the same values as America. Whatever it's an old world view, but it is definitely the dominant view. And then you face the very real prospect that the new administration under Donald Trump would be even harder right. I mean, there's a brutality about what's waiting in the shadows that's positively chilling. So the situation is across the board sad, and the connection that we feel, the U.S., I'm talking about diplomatically, to Israel is definitely being stressed.
And speaking of sadness, here's some more sad information to follow up that. There's not a whole lot of word on what kind of continued aid efforts into Gaza will look like from this point. But here's a quick reminder of how dire the situation actually is over there. Last week, The Lancet published a study finding that the Gaza death toll could potentially exceed 186,000 people, or 8% of the pre-war population, taking into consideration not just deaths from bombing and ammunitions, but also deaths from rampant disease, starvation, dehydration, and lack of shelter. And speaking of starvation, according to UN experts, Israel's targeted starvation campaign in Gaza, that's a quote, is a form of genocide with famine rampant throughout the region. Israel has since accused the UN of spreading misinformation and supporting Hamas propaganda. Also, despite Israeli blockades reducing aid flow throughout Gaza, Israel also accused the UN of failing to do their job to distribute aid effectively and efficiently. So, more sad news, not a whole lot of hope on the horizon for the Palestinians. Jordan, any final thoughts?
I take issue with people, not us three, but just in general, I see it often in media, in punditry, and even in communications online. People who support Israel, and if they want to do that, that's their right, but they will see a headline like that. And to me, that just makes my heart sink, because you think about all of those lives lost. And they see that headline and they think, this is the opportunity for me to split hairs about what label they're using. It's not a genocide, or it's not an occupation. And to those people, I just ask, what are you doing to make sure the suffering ends? What are you doing to try to fight to make sure that this suffering ends? And more often than not, sadly, there's nothing. It's just they want to run cover for what Israel is doing. And that's just deeply unsettling. It seems like a very hollow way to approach a very real tragedy.
I think it's also, you're dealing with a little bit of a battered wife syndrome, in the sense that there is a strong Jewish community in the West that feels a strong resurgence of anti-Semitism. I'm sure they would say that there's any excuse that is used to produce an anti-Semitic response. And so you have violence against Jews, you have, this is something that the Jewish community has endured for decades. And I suspect that there is some of that informs a bit of perspective when it comes to looking at the Middle East. So I at least the dialogue, because you referenced the dialogue, Jordan, I think the dialogue's informed on some level because of those real anxieties. That's not, those are not concocted. Levels of Jew hating in this country and violence against Jewish people has gone up. So all I'm trying to explain, and I'm not excusing it, I'm simply suggesting that there's a bit of that underpins a lot of that perspective that what you just mentioned.
Absolutely. We shouldn't discount that it's a different connection than, say, US observers or US commentators on the war in Iraq or Afghanistan. It is a very unique situation, and there are like family ties, ethnic ties, religious ties. Absolutely. My issue is just with people who only want to get involved to push back on a label. But totally hear you. I'm totally in agreement. I think it's a totally fair point, Mark.
Yeah, and I think overall, whenever you're looking at international conflicts, like especially ones like this one, there's often two different sides to different ways of looking at it, I'll say, right? Not just the two sides that are fighting each other, but two different perspectives as far as there's always a political aspect of it, and then there's always a cultural or religious aspect of it. And sometimes the cultural religious aspects will be used to justify the more political aspects. So there's always that underlying impact on either side. So they both have to kind of like find harmony somewhere. And harmony is not a thing that really exists during war.